Welcome to the June 5th Planning Commission meeting. First thing we'll do is stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, can we get a roll call, please?
Hinsman.
Here.
Moody. Here. Morissette.
Here.
Reese.
Here.
Stiesel.
Here.
Toland.
Here.
Woolsey.
Here.
Okay, next we'll have approval of the minutes from the May 1st meeting.
I so move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next, public comments. Anybody on us has anything they'd like to say? Okay, otherwise we'll go on to current items. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna have Sean Lenz come up and he's gonna give us a little introduction into TID 13 and 14, and then we'll go into the public hearings.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening on the agenda is a public hearing on two proposed tax increment districts. What I was going to do in advance of the public hearing is just give the Plan Commission and those in the public today a brief overview of the two proposed districts. In the packet for the Plan Commission, you have the draft project plans. And that what I've worked on also with the city is an executive summary. You'll see it up on the screen as well. And that's what we'll go through with the Plan Commission. As I move through the material, please feel free to interrupt me with any questions. And Brant, to move through the slides, just the mouse? Okay. Okay. This one here. Yep, I got it. Yeah. There we go.
Might want to zoom them up because these are small TVs.
Okay. Thank you. How's that? Okay. Where I wanted to start today, just a quick show of hands. I recognize some of the faces up there. Have everyone been a part of discussions on tax increment before? As I usually like to start. Okay, great. That's good. We're going to talk about just basically how does this tool work at the front end of the discussion. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time giving an executive summary of the proposal for district number 13 and district number 14. And finally, we'll finish up with some timeline and some question issues after that. Okay. To start out with, we've got a chart that we use to try to go through the mechanics of how tax increment financing works. It's one of the few tools that cities and villages primarily have at your disposal to try to promote development or redevelopment in the city. But what you see up here is more about the mechanics of how it works. To start out with, we have to pick a contiguous area within the city or a boundary. So that's step number one. And in doing that, that area has a value to it, a taxable value to it. And that taxable value is called the base value of the tax increment district. The base value is shown up here. Whatever that value is, and this is just for the sake of example, let's say it's $500,000. That base value is currently taxed by all the taxing jurisdictions, and the revenue goes to all the taxing jurisdictions. When we create the TIF, we freeze that base value, and any new value up and above that value is taxed at the same rate, but instead of that new, what's called increment tax value, instead of the taxes paid on that value going to all the taxing jurisdictions, they all go to a special fund that the city has. And that special fund then is used to fund development and redevelopment initiatives that really try to create that value in the first place. So it's a financing tool that allows new development and new redevelopment to pay for the expenses to really to get it to go in the first place. Okay? So that's how the financing tool side of the tax increment process works. Okay? All right. Great, I'll shrink this down here for a second. Now, when the city creates that fund, the tax increment district fund, I'd mentioned, and then taxes on that new value, that increment value, come into the city, what are the expenses that the city can use that new revenue stream to pay for? Again, those expenses trying to encourage new development and redevelopment. That's what you'll see up on page 4 here of the handout. This is a list of different expenses that the city can incur and use revenue from the tax increment district fund to pay for. And they include infrastructure expenses, the cost of land, infrastructure, utility infrastructure, development incentives or cash grants. These are all possible expenses, also including expenses that are outside of the boundaries of the district but within a half mile. All those are eligible costs. Okay? Okay. The next couple slides, we're looking at 2 potential districts here in the city, and that's what the public hearing is for this evening. The first district that we'll talk about is district number 13, and on your handouts, it's on page 5 and 6. 6 includes a map if you're looking for a little bit more of a reference. District number 13 is proposed to be an industrial district. And an industrial district, is, as the name implies, is really trying to promote industrial development within the city. This district has a maximum life of 20 years and an expenditure period, or a period where you can incur costs that we talked about on the previous page and use this fund to pay for it, of the first 15 years. The district itself is an overlay of property that is in an existing district in the city. Probably the best way to describe it to you, that the map again is on the next page that we'll get to in a second, but it's an overlay primarily of properties in tax increment district number 5, which is the Whitetail Ridge Corporate Park, that have not been able to be developed at this point or remain as vacant parcels at this point. So the primary purpose of the district is to promote development on this site and really complete the Whitetail Ridge Corporate Park, expand the tax base, and create additional job opportunities. All right. On this next page, I wanted to highlight a couple of final things about TID number 13. Here you can see the map out in the Whitetail Ridge Corporate Park area. The blue lines that you see there are the boundaries of the proposed new district. And again, it's targeting property primarily that remains vacant and has not developed under the old tax increment district, district number 5, that is in the area. You'll also see a list of the different project costs that we are looking to involve with district number 13. There are some infrastructure costs, water, sewer, some trail costs along Paulson Road. There is some potential land acquisition, some water looping. Most of the projects in and around the district, some of them outside the boundaries, but within a half mile. What we're expecting in terms of total costs related to the district, costs up front for the infrastructure, potential interest to issue debt and pay back, somewhere in the range of just under $5.5 million. And in terms of new development on the remaining property that's undeveloped in the area, we're expecting to see somewhere in the range of about $17.5 million in new increment value. So just to take a step back, when we talked about how the TIF works, what we're looking for is to try to incentivize that $17.5 million in new development using a combination of incentives to potential businesses that will come out into the area, as well as some necessary infrastructure improvements to encourage that to happen as well. Okay. We're going to move forward to district number 14 in a second here, but is there any question at this point that the Plan Commission has about this particular district, number 13?
I guess I do have a question regarding the taxable value of the current properties out there. Is it what I'm wondering about, if the city owns that property, so what is the taxable value of a lot of those parcels? Are we starting at zero and then the increment is fully 100% after it's developed and there's nothing for the other taxable entities because it starts at zero?
So if I get off track, please tell me I'm off track. But what's going to happen here, the parcels that are already developed out there and are privately owned, that value is either it will be in the base value of this new district. Currently, the taxes on that value are going to TID 5, but in a couple years, when TID 5's paid off, then they'll start going to the other taxing jurisdictions. What the city's going to collect out there on the property that the city owns, there's no tax value on that now. When, let's say a business comes in and builds a building that's worth $6.5 million in value, the $6.5 million the taxes on the $6.5 million will all go to the tax increment district for the term of the tax increment district. And then after all the expenses have been repaid, or 20 years, that's the maximum, at that point, then the value will shift back and become part of the tax base of the school, the county, the city, and the tech college.
Okay.
So is that,
Yep.
am I getting to your, okay, I want to make sure I'm getting to your.
That's what my question was, and I was just wondering then, so those other jurisdictions don't get anything out of the taxation for 20 years?
Up to.
Up to 20.
That's the maximum term of the district. Oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes we'll see the districts pay a little earlier than their maximum life, and then they can close early. But that's the maximum.
Okay.
But they haven't been getting it anyway. There's
Oh.
been nothing for them to get anyway, so.
Yep. That's a good point, Scott. Thank you for, one of the findings that the Plan Commission, the council, and also a group called the Joint Review Board, kind of to the question, the other taxing jurisdictions are involved in this process so they understand what the city's trying to achieve and can be a part of it. They see these same plans and can talk to us. And what we're looking for is a finding by all groups that but for this financing tool, we're not going to be able to get that $17.5 million in new value out there. So right now, nobody's getting anything from it. In the long run, it'll take a little bit of time, but in the long run, that $17.5 million would become part of the tax base of all the taxing jurisdictions. Okay, any other questions on this before we go to 14? Okay.
Sean, I got one quick question. And
You bet.
You'll be able to answer it really quick, I know you will. We only get 20 years in this one, but we get 27 on the next one?
Yes.
Oh, because the next one's a blight.
Yep.
Okay.
That's and maybe just for everybody's benefit, there are a couple different categories of districts. Industrial, which is what District 13 is proposed, and the finding is that at least 50% of the property is for industrial development. We meet that finding. Mixed use is another type of district where at least 50% has to be commercial, industrial, or residential, combination of those. And then there are also districts, a blight or blight rehabilitation type district. The process of creating pretty much the same, but the mixed use and industrial have 20-year lives. Blight and rehabilitation have 27. The theory from the state is that oftentimes those districts can take a little bit more time to be able to generate the revenue to pay back the investment that the city makes, and hence they're allowed to have a little bit longer life. Okay. Okay, that's a good segue into District 14 as well. District 14 is right outside our door, right over here, out the window. It is the property adjacent to us. I guess that would be, get it turned around. Yep. The district is proposed as a blight elimination district to develop/redevelop that site. It, as a blight elimination district, has a 27-year maximum life and 5 years less than that for the expenditure period. We do have, as a city, we do have an existing district in that area that was created in 2008, I think, about 10 years ago. What we found is that with some potential redevelopment on that site, we only have 10 years left on that existing district. In looking at our options, overlaying it and creating a new district seemed the best fit to try to achieve the city's goals here. And primarily of those, we'll get to some of the expenses in a second, but we're expecting to need to do some development incentive in order to get the redevelopment on that site to move forward. And big picture goals for 14 is the long-term redevelopment of that apartment and other property just next door to us here, and improve the Kinnickinnick area there and the property adjacent to the city hall that I think has been in its existing state for a number of years. Okay. If we go forward to 14, you can see this is a high-level map of a lot of River Falls. In the blue lines on the map, that's the proposed area. It's 3 parcels right next door to us here, right next to City Hall. What you'll see there is we've got the listed expenses that do include some electrical infrastructure expenses, some acquisition of property expenses, removal of the apartment building that's next door to clear that site for redevelopment. And there's also some completion of a trail bridge that is outside of the boundaries but within a half mile. All of those are project costs that are in the project plan and included in this district. Those costs, as well as interest and admin, organizational costs, are estimated at $4.7 million approximately. Expect those costs to be a combination of internal loans from other funds of the city, as well as potentially some debt issuance to finance some of those costs. And the projected new development, which would create that increment value that we talked about, that new value that when it's taxed creates the tax increment district fund where these expenses can be paid for, are estimated in the range of approximately $9 million in value over the life of the district. Any questions on the proposal for 14 before we talk about the timeline?
Sean, I just want to point out one thing to the people that aren't familiar with the word blight. Sounds kind of harsh. The redevelopment's much softer, but we use the same category of TID. I can't remember the number, on the Family Fresh site, what I'll call this Family Fresh site. Yep. So you can kind of see the value of using the blighted category to redevelop and what it's brought to downtown. I think it's been a pretty successful TID. I don't know, Julie, is that in the black yet?
Well, it gives you the extra time.
Yeah.
Yep. It should mention, to follow up, Scott, on what you've started, the blight is it's a statutory category, a tax increment in the law. We talked about this earlier in the Joint Review Board. It is not, sometimes you think about it, okay, it's blighted and the property's going to drop rapidly in value.
Right.
We want to go the other, that's what you, and it's also not a finding on the property that then starts a process of taking or eminent domain or anything like that. It is simply a category of tax increment district that we're using to create the district, and it's really the best fit for what we're trying to achieve in this instance.
Is all the property that we're talking about in 14 city-owned?
No, there is one parcel that's owned by a trust, right? I think, Lisa, you're involved with that, correct? Yep. The Moody, it's the one that's a wooded property closest to Division.
Right south
yes.
of Cedar Street.
Yeah.
Right south of Cedar Street, the old creamery site.
Yep. And the other two are city-owned. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on 14? The last item I wanted to go over with the group is the timeline. Earlier today, we had an initial meeting of the Joint Review Board. So Julie was the city representative. There was a representative from the county, school district, Tech College, and Paul Schwabach was chosen as the 5th member of that group, or the at-large member. And he's going to be there for both of the TIDs. The only kind of unique situation we have here is TID number 13 is in St. Croix County. So they have a representative of that Joint Review Board, and TID number 14 is in Pierce County. So there's different reps for that situation. That group met. We discussed a lot of the same things we've been talking about with the Plan Commission. We also selected chairpersons, and we selected that 5th member, Paul. That was step number 1. Step number 2 is this Plan Commission public hearing, starting with this introduction, then allowing for any questions from either yourselves or the public. And following that, there are 2 resolutions on the agenda that the Plan Commission can act on that would move the process forward to the City Council. And we expect the City Council to potentially take up District number 13 at your later City Council meeting, the later of the 2 in June. 14, due to some issues related to the old district, we may see that be taken up later in the potentially August, September timeframe. Again, these assuming that the Plan Commission moves forward with this. Ultimately, if both districts are approved by the City Council, it then goes back to that Joint Review Board, and they have a vote on the 2 tax increment districts as well. And the final step in the process is just a documentation requirement that needs to be filed with the state of Wisconsin. So that's what we're looking at before, Mayor, maybe going to the opening it up for any questions from the public as well. If there's any questions that the group has either about tax increment financing in general or these 2 proposed districts, I'd be happy to attempt to answer those.
Anybody got any questions? No? Okay. Thanks, Sean.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll close the Planning Commission, and we'll open up a public hearing regarding the proposed project plan, boundaries, and creation of tax and increment district number 13. Is there anybody in the audience has anything they'd like to say about District 13? Okay, we'll close the public hearing on District 13, and we're open up another public hearing on District 14 for the same reason. If anybody has anything they'd like to say about District 14. Okay, we'll close that, and I will consider a motion on 13.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve, let me get to the resolution. Resolution designating proposed boundaries and approving a project plan for tax increment District 13 in the city of River Falls, Wisconsin.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And then I'll take another motion for District 14.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve the tax increment financing for District 14 in the city of River Falls.
Second.
Questions or comments on this? And Lisa wanted to abstain? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and next we move on to updates and information. County Road MM Development. And Amy will give us a little update.
Thank you, Mayor and Plan Commission. We have a proposal on a site just behind Walgreens on County Trunk Highway MM. And Matt Frisbee with Ayers would like to just give you an overview of that site and what the proposal is, and will be coming forward. You'll see more of this as they move forward, and I'll let him jump in. Does that look? Is that good? Okay.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Commission. Appreciate it. This is informational only, not coming for any approvals or anything tonight. We got a long way to go. But on this particular property, there's 2 pieces here. One that connects us over on St. Croix Street over in front of the bowling alley. And the other one is the larger one that is now our outdoor storage, RV, trucks, just right behind Walgreens. So it's 2.6 acres and possibly somewhere around 0.2 acres is the other one. And so we've compiled that. We have those pieces of property under contract. Took a little time, but we got there. We've been working on this for quite a while behind the scenes just to get to this point to have a project. So what we're proposing there is looking at a site plan that would show multifamily market rate apartments there. It would have underground parking, 60 units. It'd be a mixture of some studios, 1-bedrooms, and then some larger 2-bedrooms in there to try to look at what the current market has just come back over this last year, I'm sure it's a month or so, that we've had to take a look at with the city, have the privilege to take a look at. So as we develop this site, we're just looking at, how can we fit that a little bit towards the back of the site, which would be on the west. This is the township line out here. This is all open green space right now. And then we look at a continuation, extension of St. Croix Street to actually make that physical connection. As you know, this is just a grassy area right now behind Perkins, and this is part of the parking lot behind Walgreens. So we'd work with city engineering and the staff to figure out that connection, the utilities, everything that comes with that, and actually complete that street. And then look at a possible pad here for retail. We don't have anything in mind right now. We're trying to take the temperature of the market out there. Is there a need for something that might have like a drive-through or something with it? The main focus is the apartment building that we're looking at. So again, this would have underground parking with it, and then we'd have the surface parking to meet our parking requirements. We have things with the landscape, of course, stormwater, other things that we still have to meet. And then there is one thing that we are just working on resolving is just the parking from across the way in the production warehouse building. And just is there a need for any type of overflow? They don't use that parking now, but there's kind of this unwritten agreement that we just want to work with the city and the staff on that, on just making sure that comes to a resolution. So we have ways to go on all those things, but that kind of gives a feel for what we're proposing. It'd be 3 stories. It'd be a brick and stucco look to it, something fairly substantial because we are trying to hit more of a market rate rather than an income-based. But again, everything looks very favorable from a market standpoint. We are struggling a little bit getting contractors interested for bidding because everyone's pretty busy. So we're working on that. Ideally, we'd like to be going this fall, and by this fall, I probably mean like October. It might push into the spring, just depends on how things go, but we're still trying to get on track. So we'll be working with Julie and Sean and others about the dollars part of it, and then the extension of the street, working with the city staff, and then coming back and forth in front of you and the council for final approvals. Because they'll be replatting, will be, the city will take over the street once it's built. It'll be platted back to the city. So a lot of things to work out, but I just wanted to throw it in front of you today. See if there's any thoughts or questions that we can dwell on. Otherwise, you'll see it again as we go a little further.
Matt, maybe I missed this. How many acres is that site?
This is 2.6, and this is about a quarter. So it's under 3 acres, but it's
Okay.
like 2.8, 2.9.
And are you thinking, I know it's a little preliminary right now, but are we thinking PUD for this, or are we thinking, Amy's looking at me like, don't bring that question up.
Right. So right now it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's zoned industrial, and we would probably rezone it to a B3 with a PUD.
Okay.
Again, as we submit a little closer, that'll become a little bit clearer.
And I realize we're down the road there.
Yeah.
So are you thinking for the proposed retail drive-through, something similar to what Family Fresh did with just kind of a green space out in front that reserves it, or how would that look?
If we're crunching the numbers as if we're building it at the same time. So this might go first, and then this one might follow in the spring.
Oh, sort of spec it then?
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, and again, it's not huge. We have about 4,000 square feet. We're thinking couple tenants possibly in there. It just, we have to kind of get it out there and see what the appetite is for
I
something.
understand.
Because it is about a half block off Main Street, so.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions? I think once we get further down the road with it, okay.
Right.
Yep. I think that's it.
All right, thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay. Next, we'll move on to the calendar. Next planning commission meeting will be July 3rd, so everybody knows. And that's it, and then we're gonna have we'll have our little workshop after the adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.